probably a lot of folks that I don't deal with around the world, they want to look under the hood, and they want to know their business and the prospects of selling their business from that of a sophisticated acquirer. What do you look for in a deal?
There's a couple of things. So big buckets, let's say strategic fit and financial fit.
Okay.
So strategically, there are things we need. There are parts of our business that are growing faster than we can bring people into them, or perhaps an area where we're succeeding in Europe, but we have no offering in North America. So we might do an acquisition to round out our offerings or to increase the number of talented people we have in the organization, right? So there has to be a reason for us to do the deal. But and that's always the truth, right? Most organizations who are buying a company are buying it for a reason. They have an investment hypothesis. That's usually what it's called. On the other hand, there's the financial questions. And the truth is that they matter more now than they did a couple of years ago. As interest rates have gone up, your cash flow, your EBITDA, earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization, and your revenue growth really matter.
Hmm.
And I think they get more inspection now than they have historically.
Hmm.
We look for firms which are growing quickly on some combination of top line and bottom line.
Hmm.
Ideally both, although that can be hard to do. So if you're selling your firm, you should think hard about doing everything, pulling whatever levers you can to ensure that you're showing consistent revenue growth, that you're hitting your projections, right? So that what you're saying you're going to do is actually what happens in the
Right.
real world, and that that's also falling to the bottom line. I realize, by the way, that's a really hard thing to do.
Sure.
But if you're capable of doing that and able to convince a potential acquirer that this is something which will continue, it will ramp your valuation and make the deal much, much easier to get done.
Hmm. In a conversation you had with John Warlow, who is a friend and a colleague, so to speak, and does a hell of a job as a host, by the way.
Mm-hmm.
John asked a question because, as I understand your model as a senior guy at Valtech, right, that you're going out and you're sort of probing the market, you're talking to potential sellers with the anticipation that Valtech will, buy their business, right? And as I understand your model, you're going out and finding that prospect. And I like to say, and I stole this from someone, so I can't take credit, but you leave the cave, kill something, drag it home, right? And you bring it back to your M&A team, and they go through all the formal stages of due diligence. God bless those people, by the way, because I think I would want to jump off of a tall building if I had to do that. But um, you're dealing with a potential acquisition target, a seller. I was very intrigued by the point that you and John made about the tribal language, uh,
Uh,
and the connection to a seller. To walk us through that, Randy. What does that mean, and how does that play out?
yeah, it's one of the most fascinating parts of the job. So I should have said this earlier. My job as in acquisitions at Beltec is really pipeline development. So lead flow, right? Finding companies that fit our model. And then I sometimes have to do the business case for why we should buy them. And then periodically I get involved in the integration after the deal gets done. What that means pragmatically is I'm calling a lot of founders because we generally buy founder led companies somewhere between I don't know, 10 and $35 million US in revenue. So I'm picking up the phone. I'm cold calling. I'm doing sales as I did back in 1995 when we started the company. But the tribal language piece is where I can very quickly, we can establish a conversation with another founder because you've had shared life experience, and most of these deal calls don't go anywhere, right? Like it's like any other cold calling environment. I make lots of calls, I have lots of nice conversations, and very few of them bear fruit, but the
Right.
ones that do matter. But the conversations happen, I think, because we have that ability to very quickly establish that we've had comparable life experiences. I always joke that in most cases, we both had to make payroll and not had the money in the bank because that's kind of like the getting in price for being an entrepreneur somehow,
Right.
right?
Right. Right.
So, it makes it's the most enjoyable part of my job, this chance to reconnect with people who are living the founder lifestyle.
Yeah, that's really cool. How when you're having those conversations, right? And we'll pick a number just for today's conversation. 90% of those conversations don't go past you meeting a new friend on the phone, right? It kind of stops there because, frankly, and you know this better than anyone, most companies are not ready to sell, right?
Mhm.
80% are not ready, which is why, you know, working with them in a growth fashion, I think adds a lot of value to their business. But when when you're dealing with these founders, you're on the phone, you're building some rapport, you're making a connection. I can tell you, having spent 35 minutes with you now, that you're just a likable guy. Who would not want to be on the phone with Randy Woods? But when you begin to unpack those conversations, how important is transparency in the process?
Mm. That's interesting because part of the motivation for me to get involved in the acquisitions of Beltec was that I saw the company going down the road with a company and I knew the founders and I didn't really want to work with them.
Mm,
I won't say they're bad people, but they weren't people that I really wanted to spend time with. And so um, very quickly understanding whether the corporate culture, which tends to be defined by the founder, is something that's attractive to Valtech, is part of it. And yes, that ability to quickly establish the sort of transparency and then also the self-awareness of the founder, because um, most of the people you're talking to have done amazing things. They've accomplished great things. Uh, if they really don't feel they have anything else to learn in life, they're probably not a good fit for us. And
mm,
so that ability to understand the sense of humility and the willingness to experience share some sense of vulnerability goes a long way to very quickly establishing whether there's an opportunity or not for us to fit together. It sounds kind of soft, but it's amazing how consistently this happens in phone calls and how quickly you can get to a no if the uh, sort of interpersonal connection isn't there.
mm. Define that red flag. You can't see my whole studio, but I have a big red neon sign over in the corner to alert anyone that we're on air,
Mm.
right? It's a big red neon sign. What's your big red neon sign with that seller that you're engaging for the first time with?
Yeah, there's so take away all the financial stuff because you're right. Lots of companies aren't viable,
Right.
right? So I would suggest there's two. One is um, unrealistic or hyperinflated sense of what their company's worth. A lot of entrepreneurs really have no idea of kind of how much their company's worth. Sometimes it's the other way around. That they think it's worth way less than it is, but usually it's a hyperinflated sense of what it's worth. And if that gap is so big that I see no way of possibly closing it, there's no way we're moving ahead on that one.
Yeah.
And then the second piece is if there is a sense that they know everything there is to know about the market
Mm,
and they aren't likely to fit into our corporate management culture because we like to keep the founders around, then I think that is a place where we stop talking in many cases. It just doesn't work for us. If you're, um, it's like when you're drafting a sports team. Sometimes the most talented person on the field is not the person that you want in the locker room.
right.
That's kind of true for us as well.
Yeah. Interesting. I had a conversation earlier with one of our private equity partners, and we were talking. My past goes back years ago, two lifetimes ago, in the technology space, and it was two very very large at the time when the acquisition happened. I think it was the largest acquisition in U.S. history, right? And the two cultures. I was on one side of the fence, and you know the buyer was on the other side of the fence. I sort of refer to it, without getting into the weeds of that transaction, you know, the cowboys buying the city folk, you know, and two very very distinct cultures, oil and water, I might add, you know, as a descriptor. And you know, a lot of fallout, a lot of low morale, just a lot of, pardon the expression, crap came out of that, you know, that post transaction, you know, culture. It was just really weird. Um, how do you and Valtech, you go through this acquisition process? How do you blend those cultures when it when they don't perfectly align? How do you work through that?
You ask a really tough question. And actually, in some ways, it's not just about Valtech; it's about the entire M&A industry. Because,
Right.
yeah, I think when you look at failures, the chief cause of failure tends to be putting together incompatible cultures. It's a hard question to figure out what cultures are before we actually start working together, right?
Right.
Because the plaque on the wall that says teamwork and collaboration are our values.
Right.
We've all sat in meetings where everyone at the table hates each other and no one works together, but the plaque's still there, right? So the
Yeah.
real values of the organization and the express, they're not always the same thing.
Right. Right.
So what we try to do is have a lot of our senior people during the operational due diligence meet with their senior people,
Mm.
and very quickly you can get a sense of what the rules of the road are, how what's rewarded, what's punished. Right, that's one big indicator of what culture is. Commonalities of background. We're fairly careful to um, make these kind of abstract because you want to be careful that your own personal prejudices don't get involved in it, right? But the sense of like, do they seem to care about the same things that we do before the acquisition is really important. Post acquisition, we have a post merger integration group that I get involved in sometimes that works really hard. And a big part of that job is like almost translation, translating what this meant for your 50-person firm in a 6,000-person firm, and trying to be transparent about why some things have to change because we have financial rigor you may not have had, or we have corporate systems you don't have, or we have reporting and transparency systems you've never had to encounter before. And so, like, just trying to be transparent around the reasoning behind these things so they don't seem arbitrary. Oh, it's corporate again. Like, if you express the reasoning behind it, it seems to ease that integration of cultures after the fact, but it's not easy.
Mm.
And there's almost all invariably challenges that no one anticipates, and they're always new in each deal. So it's tough to get better at it.
Yeah. Yeah. Very, very interesting. I heard you make a comment, and I love, by the way, how you took what could be a very complicated endeavor and you boiled it down to, I think you called it a straw poll, right?
Mhm.
And essentially, you're, licking your finger, sticking it in the air, and saying, "Tell me, gut level, how the winds are blowing with this possible acquisition," right?
Yeah, pragmatically, once our teams have had a chance to get to know each other a little during the operational due diligence, some of our senior people, and I don't mean the M&A people, I mean the people, senior architects or creative directors have met each other. We have a meeting to kind of assess how everyone's feeling, and it's literally kind of a thumbs up, thumbs down kind of thing. Like, anybody have like any real red flags we have to look at here in terms of their culture, interpersonal, etc. And it's amazing how quickly you can pull information out of people when you have that in the round with people who trust each other and who have the best interests of the firm at heart, and
Yeah.
who tend to have really solid interpersonal judgment. So, with the caveat you've got the right people doing that, I think it's a really valuable thing to do.
Yeah. And I would think that seller, right, your acquisition target,
Mhm.
you are using a clinical term, which I think personally, and I'm not getting on a soapbox, I hope, but I hope that we are bringing more of relational expertise to M&A than just purely transactional. But I think it's good for the seller too to also go through that exercise. Hey, are we linking up with the right partner?
Due diligence is usually thought of as being almost entirely one way, right? The acquirer makes sure what they're buying is solid. But I would encourage people, if you're selling your company, you need to spend a lot of time looking at the firm you're selling to.
Right.
Certainly, if you have an earnout to understand whether or not it's achievable, but also your people are going to end up there. And so understanding what the motivation is, what are they likely to do? Not what they say they're going to do, but what are they likely to do? Is this an acquirer who's going to shut down two-thirds of your operation because they've got excess capacity elsewhere? You need to take that into account if that's what's going to happen. You may decide to go ahead anyways, but you need to figure that out ahead of time. Otherwise, I think there's a lot of regrets from founders who've sold their companies. So you see the numbers, they vary from like 20 to 60%,
Yeah.
wish they'd done things differently. And I think that's a little bit because that due diligence tends to be one-sided, and it needn't be. You can make demands both ways.
Right. Right. Totally agree. Well, my fear has come to reality in that I knew this was going to be a fast paced conversation and time was going to fly. and I'm looking at the clock saying, where did 45 minutes of our life go? Which is a great testament to